Hello, and welcome to this edition of Delain's Digest. I'm your host, Catherine Delain, and I'm here with Keith Albert Willis. You might have seen Keith on some of my other shows, but today he's going to talk at length about his father, a pioneer in radio, Forrest Willis. Hello, Keith. Thank you for joining me.
It's good to be here.
Forrest Willis now, a name a lot of people don't know anymore. I mentioned a lot of people, some do, some don't. Who was Forrest Willis?
Okay, first of all, Forrest Willis is my father.
Your father, absolutely.
And or I and my sister grew up in Albany. But before Albany, he was born in Hoosick Falls. Mm-hmm. And at the time he was born, 1904, Hoosick Falls was really a thriving industrial area. They had a big farm machinery company there. They had the railroads. So there was a lot of prosperity there when he was born and as he was growing up. What happened was his father died. And back then, when the breadwinner died, it created a lot of problems in the family.
Women didn't work.
No, and my grandmother never did really. She eventually worked for the state in Albany. But when she was in Hoosick Falls, she was poverty-stricken at the time. So in 1913, or actually 1915, they moved to Albany. And they visited Hoosick Falls frequently. And my father was a big promoter of Hoosick Falls when he was on the radio. But they moved to Albany, lived on High Street, 21 High Street. It's not there anymore. It's right near the state capitol, where the state capitol building is.
A lot of streets are gone now from the state capitol.
Right. Well, it was tenement houses, rentals, and they lived there actually for quite a while, lived there till 1937 when he got married. But anyway, when he moved to Albany, he went to Albany High School. And at Albany High School, well, let me back up a little bit. One of the main things in his life was that he was kind of encouraged to play the piano, let's put it that way, by his mother. Now he came
encouraged was quite a word, wasn't it?
Right. Well, he came from a musical family, so there was some basis for that. His father, Albert, and Albert's father, Byron, they were all local singers in various choirs. And so he had a lot of musical background in the family and a lot of reason to maybe learn how to play the piano. But at the time that his father died, his father was a station master at the railroad station, and his grandfather, Byron, was actually the police chief. He started out being a patrolman, but he was actually the police chief in Hoosick Falls. So when they moved to Albany after Albert died, they lived on High Street. And going to Albany High, he was getting along in visibility with his piano playing, and he started various small bands or combos that played at Albany High dances. Then when he graduated in 1922 from Albany High, there was kind of a dual occupation choice here. He started out going to law school. He went to Albany Law School, graduated in 1925, but he also had a lot of bands, as many as 10 bands.
He could sing and dance as well,
couldn't he? He could sing, and it attracted attention, and he at one point entered a competition at Harmonis Bleecker Hall and won, and then had this opportunity to go into vaudeville. So you had this potential vaudevillian who could sing and dance and entertain, a band leader and songwriter, and then you had this fellow who became a lawyer, Forrest Willis, the lawyer, who had an office at 82 State Street.
Some people would say that they actually go together. Some lawyers are vaudevillians even today.
Well, I think that he never got into that. Okay, he
had one case.
He had one case, a divorce case, where the people reconciled and he didn't get paid, and so he had been getting paid quite well with his entertainment venues. So he decided that he would pursue the band leading career. And what happened was, this was about the time that radio was becoming visible.
When he was born, there was really no radio, nothing like that, was there?
And there really wasn't up until the 1920s, early 20s. But then, I don't know the exact year that WGY was established, but with WGY, that's where he got his start. And he got his start, Breslow Furniture, which used to be located at 609 State Street here in Schenectady, sponsored his shows. And this picture
we have an early shot of your dad.
Is an early shot of him when he was actually probably just out of high school.
Yeah,
or
he sort of
law
looks
school.
collegiate there, yeah.
Right, right, and he's a very dapper guy.
So this
And
is the 20s.
This is in the 20s,
Yeah.
right? And at the time he went, got this offer to be on the, and they referred to him as this, the Breslau Singing Furniture Man.
My goodness.
That's how he was. In other words, before there was Forrest Willis, there was the Breslau Singing Furniture Man. Well, the Breslau Singing Furniture Man, eventually, he had been writing songs all along, and eventually this booklet was published with some of his songs in it, and he looks much older than his age.
Well, that's
but
the
he's
mature
probably in
look.
there- He's probably really only, maybe 25,
So was a
26
musician,
there.
singer, writer, a songwriter?
Right, a lot of different things. But this, the Breslau Furniture sponsorship really got it gave him a start. And this is what was needed back then. You needed a sponsor.
Yeah, you needed someone to really push
Right,
you
and
along.
a sponsor back then, I think it's important for what we're talking about. It's important to understand what a sponsor did. A sponsor, back then, advertising was not something you did on the radio. You did not advertise, you sponsored. So they would have somebody like Breslau who would sponsor my father. You might mention Breslau Furniture at the beginning of the show. You might talk about it at the end, but the show was my father's show, and they were sponsoring it, and that was it. There was one advertiser. So anyway, Breslau was big in terms, and it was a big, they had like 4 or 5 stores around the state, so it was a big furniture organization.
But he got other sponsors as well, didn't he? Local names, Myers, Whitney's.
Right. And that comes along a little bit later. One of the things here that in I'd say 1931, a guy by the name of Harold E. Smith, who was a very entrepreneurial guy, came to Albany, and I'm doing research on Harold Smith now because he seems to be hard to trace, but he actually himself was a violin player in vaudeville at the Hippodrome in New York City, moved to Pittsfield, started a radio station, and moved that station is WOKO, WABY, up to Elk Street. He built this facility on Elk Street, 3-story, state-of-the-art, now we're talking 1931, state-of-the-art building. And that's really where my father got his push. Harold Smith was very entrepreneurial. He liked to see a lot of different shows. He was looking for ratings. And so Harold Smith, the entrepreneurial radio man, said, Forrest, we need to do something different. We need to do something exciting. What are we going to do? Now, all along, even before Harold Smith came on the scene, my father had been doing, he had his own bands, and he was still doing band performances, and this is somewhat of what
I
this
sort
looks
of hear is the time went closer to the Depression era. Your father was making a switch, wasn't he? He started out entertaining people, and then got more involved with social concerns, things like that.
Well, I think what happened was this. First of all, they saw that. First of all, they started out with this musical clock format. His show in 1935, 36 was called The Musical Clock, and it was on from the 30s up until 59 when he passed away. He was on for various stations. But the idea originally was that it was kind of a semi-vaudeville type of show where there was all sorts of exciting bells and whistles
And a dog.
dogs and all. I mean, the dog's name was Founder. I don't know whether
Founder
anything-
the dog.
Founder was the dog, and they had a sidekick named Frank,
Oh, dear.
who was outrageous. And there was all this got publicity in the paper.
This
and
is
it
really
got,
a precursor of some old TV shows, isn't it?
Exactly.
Spike, Spike
exactly.
Jones
Well,
and Ernie
a
Kovacs.
lot of the hijinks that went on,
Yeah.
the kidding around, you see that a
Yeah.
lot now. But again, one of the things after the working with the bands, then he did a lot of different types of radio. For example, here's a picture of him editing the news. I don't know whether to get that in here right, but
So he played music, and he also wrote or gave the news.
right, he had programs where now again you got paid by sponsors according to
Oh, there's a great shot. There
what
he is.
program you did, and he being a lawyer and being fairly well educated, I watched him. He would go through these teletype. Now, some people would just rip the stuff off of the Associated Press and read it, verbatim as they took it off. He would actually take it, sit down to the desk, and edit it. So when he went on the air, and he would kind of rip out certain things, but he edited his own news. Nobody else edited it. Back then, you did your own thing. And actually, the studios themselves were really kind of crude. Here's an example of him sitting on a high chair there with a lot of equipment. There's radio studios weren't that comfortable. And you really had to, if you wanted to get visibility in the community, if you wanted to get listenership for a program like the Musical Clock, you had to really go out on the street. Now here's an example. This is John G. Myers, 1930s. This is my father.
Myers Department Store.
Right, John G. Myers, downtown Albany. A case of going out and entertaining actually from the store window. And there's all these people around the store. And I've seen, you're getting a little glare there, but anyway, the idea is you had to build credibility for yourself. You had to get out there. And another type of situation he got involved with a lot was the soapbox derby. Okay, every year there was a soapbox derby going. So he got out there, and at one point he was actually announcing the soapbox derby, and he actually went to Akron, Ohio, with a truck from Albany, and they actually broadcast from Akron.
So he really got out in the public.
Right, and when people came to Albany, he would have live entertainments. This is all live bands, and you attracted, and this is one of my favorite pictures of early on. He attracted people like the Andrews Sisters.
The Andrews Sisters.
And there he is singing on the radio.
Was he singing "Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree"?
I don't know, but anyway, he was singing on the radio with the Andrews Sisters, and then Hedy Lamarr, who eventually came to Albany, probably promoting one of her roadshow pictures that Crosby was in. Here's Hedy Lamarr and my father. But they would come to his show. They would come on to his show.
I see.
And this built ratings. And this is really where you got your credibility from on the radio, is you had to attract ratings. Now, what happened was with the ratings, the sponsor, of course, looked at the ratings, and they concluded that, gee, he's doing so well, we're going to continue advertising. That's the wrong word. We're going to continue sponsorship of the program. Okay, so that when he was on the radio doing various venues, giving, to use the term, public access, he was giving the public or organizations access to his program, which the sponsor was paying for. Since his ratings were so high, he didn't have to read any what we would call advertising now, so that he could get on. And here's a picture from the 30s where he's on for the Red Cross.
So he built up his ratings and got credibility. That way he could do promotion of certain civic events like the Red Cross.
Now here's a grand, this is in the DeWitt Clinton Ballroom. It's a picture of a March of Dimes program where the kids are bringing money in little jars. And I'll flash this one on quicker, but here's a cadre of women with little jars for the March of Dimes promotion. And what would happen would be they'd have this promotion, usually in the spring. It would last for maybe 5 to 6 weeks. People would send in money, kids would bring in money. It was good for the show, a lot of people but it was good for the March of Dimes. And then at the end, they would do a big contribution thing where it was different pictures every year, but where the money would be turned over to the appropriate March of Dimes people.
What I hear too is he used his celebrity to really promote some good causes.
Well, I think that another thing he depended on too is people would come to him, okay? In other words, people would call on the phone, and he would say, well, I don't know whether I can have you on next week, but maybe the following week. But a lot of times he developed whole new programs. For example, since he had very high ratings, he suggested, and again, they had to get a sponsor for this, but he suggested, why don't we do a program about whatever. So one of the first shows that he did in this line was he did the roving reporter. Okay. Now the roving reporter was Forrest Willis. Okay, and he went around to various organizations or schools or whatever, and taped interviews. Maybe it was 15 minutes, maybe it was a half hour, and at one point even taped Thanksgiving with our family back in 1945. But he had that flexibility. Another type of venue that he had a program called Luncheon at the DeWitt. Okay, and it was in the coffee room of the DeWitt Hotel. So the DeWitt got visibility. The people got on the air. The sponsor got good ratings. But it gave these various venues gave visibility for the organizations, and since the sponsors were happy. Now I think that's really where, when you had change take place, when a program stopped existing, it usually indicated the sponsor had stopped sponsoring the show. Okay. But one of the things and he used to go off on these tangents. When I say tangent, it meant it wasn't in the ordinary flow of just a show. He would, like, here is one of my favorite pictures of all time. It's raining, it's snowing, you have a bunch of people standing in front of this house. What is really going on here? Well, there's Forrest Willis facing the front. What he had done, he had heard about this family being burned out of their house, and 2 of their children were killed. And it's quite dramatic circumstance, but it does happen, and it happens a lot more than you think. But he got on the radio, and using, at this time it was probably Tobin Patent Company's airtime, and he didn't talk about it for a whole hour, but he would get on there and he ran a campaign to raise money for this house. Well, this is the dedication of the house. So it was a big deal. He didn't do this a lot, but this is one of the types of things that he would do.
He was very civic-minded, wasn't he?
Well, yeah, and very touching, and I like this picture. But the key thrust was having organizations call, much like with your show. You have people on your show where people come, and it's not just that they're promoting things, they're actually raising awareness in the community. And back then, my father never would have been able to do this. He never would have been able to raise this visibility for organizations if he didn't have the sponsors. And so we've got Montgomery Ward was one of the early ones. You've got W.M. Whitney and Company, which was competing with John G. Myers. And then I think the most important company for this was the Tobin Patent Company. Tobin Patent Company could visibly see their sales rise, as a result of him being on the radio and promoting their products. But they were the ones that really gave a lot of their time, and he could do things like, here's a picture, did a lot of these interviews with groups of, very good with children. Now here's an interview with a group of children. They could be scouts, they could be an organization. There was usually some organizational promotion involved with it, people that needed to get visible for some reason. Okay, so, and another thing that
we're going to take a minute to talk about this. An event that's very well known in the Capital District is the Tulip Festival. And you can go down to Washington Park every year and see the gorgeous tulips, and this area does have quite a connection with the Dutch. Your father was really there at the beginning of the Tulip Festival, wasn't he?
Right. What had happened was, during the war, a lot of cities were bombed out in Europe, and there was a lot of damage. One of the cities was Nijmegen, Holland, and in the Netherlands. And what the powers that be in Albany, and my father didn't actually start this, but he came along to promote it. There was an exchange of, not an exchange, but there was a committee established to go to Nijmegen, Holland, survey the damage, interact with the mayor and the powers that be, and come back and report to the city, and then raise funds to help people in Nijmegen rebuild. So that's where the relationship with Holland, with tulips, got started. One of the things that I will focus on when I'm writing a book is the exact details of all this. But the offshoot of it was they established a tulip festival with a lot of the Dutch ways. Of course, Albany being a city that was built up by the Dutch, there's a certain tie there.
And of course, you had to have the pretty girls.
Right, and thing is that my father always had him on his radio
and
show.
that's him crowning the tulip
Right,
queen.
there he is there, but there was also, there's one shot.
There it is, okay.
Okay, and in another year, here they are visiting his studio.
So that's all the contestants of the court.
Right,
Yeah.
that's the queen. The queen is probably sitting next to my father and the court. And then there would be just a number of different pictures. Here's the whole court in another year. It's a case of sorting out who these people are. But I think that
We're talking the early 50s here, aren't we?
right,
Okay.
right. And eventually, when he transitioned to television, then these people would be on his television show.
Oh, your father transitioned to television. Now that's a surprise. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, the thing, what happened was, quite frankly, radio was under a lot of pressure in terms of their ratings. They were gradually, this period between 1953, when WRGB, Channel 6, was the only station in town, was the only station. And then other license approvals came along. And my father was actually prevented from going on early on because there was some squabble with the FCC. But when he was on television, of course, it was a lot more visible to do promoting. Now here he is, run a program for Frigidaire refrigerators. Okay, now so he took his credibility from the radio.
Definitely different than Betty Furness, isn't he?
Right,
Yes.
right. Well, my father was very principled, and
Yes.
They tried to send a free refrigerator to our house, and he kind of said that he wasn't going to allow that. So, but anyway, he promoted really well, stand up. He could read cue cards from far away. But the whole focus didn't change really. He still had a program in the afternoon from 2 to 3 that allowed groups to come on. I mean, it was sponsored, and he actually had a few sponsors, so it wasn't just one sponsor. But the transition, he was still on radio. Okay, so he didn't give up radio. He was still on radio. He went from WTRY to WOKO, back to WOKO again. But he could still have those people appearing on his show, and you still had the celebrity people coming on. You still had like the Everly Brothers. Here's the Everly Brothers from the 50s. And they had just made their first record, so they were on the show.
They had to be very, very young.
Well, they were. I remember my father saying, he said, "Boy, those guys are really from the hills."
Yeah.
He said they are, but they had already made their Bye Bye Love and their first few songs.
It's hard to think of them now. They must be well into their senior citizen
But
years.
another type of event that he would promote too. There was an art exhibition in Albany of Grandma Moses paintings.
Oh.
And since Grandma Moses was painting,
And is that Grandma Moses?
Right, this is Grandma Moses, and that's my father, and I don't know exactly who these people are, but I think this is one of the sponsors of the art exhibition, and I think it was at the Albany Institute. And anyway, there was a quote in the paper that they wanted Grandma Moses to ride in this limousine. She said, "No, I'd rather ride in Forrest Will's convertible." So we have a lot of pictures there. But anyway, all these things added to ratings. They added to helping organizations. Now, when we're talking Albany Institute, we're not talking poverty here, but we are talking the type of event which needs visibility.
Sure.
So he could do that, and every time there was what you might say a significant program. Like here is my father with Mayor Corning, okay, back in the 50s. And Mayor Corning was on his programs periodically because Mayor Corning was really involved with community efforts. And my father was not a politician, he was very apolitical. But he brought in people like Mayor Corning. Here's a picture celebrating his 7,000th broadcast. That's a lot of broadcasts. But anyway, the pictures of fundraising events, and I think it's important, especially since we're talking on a public access station, is to realize the difference between what he was doing what allowed him to do what he did, and why it's so difficult to do. Now, the spirit may have been picked up. There's this spirit of public service.
Oh, we're talking about that. Why don't you put up this? This is a much later picture.
Okay,
right
this is a really a big. I love this. This is like a promo shot. They didn't have a lot of those, but this is like a promo shot of him.
Yeah,
on
you and I have been talking about the
WTRY.
differences in public access radio and television. And here, of course, we at SAC, we don't accept any sponsors, but we do much of what your father did, go into the community, have community groups on, so forth. So he was sort of a real pioneer for all of us that came later.
I think that he was, he kind of gradually.
You look like him, Keith, too.
Well, I don't know about that. Well, one of the things that my father had to work real hard, and one of the things that really hard. I mean, 16-hour days, and he was always because he taught secretarial school. He actually taught public speaking at Mildred Elley School.
My goodness.
Okay, so he had all these. He had a band at Caps in the Hollow in Rensselaer for years. So he had a lot of. He was an Elk, which meant that when the Elks wanted radio access, they would come to him or the Masons or whoever had.
Did your father ever go home, Keith? He was so busy.
No, as a matter of fact, one of the things people used to come up to me and say, "What is he really like?" And I'd say, I didn't even know what they were talking about. I guess they had in mind that celebrities don't go home or something. But he was always home at 6 o'clock. He always had the cat would jump in his lap. He'd have a Manhattan. You know, it was like any other
He was
household.
dad.
Never calls, never anybody called from business. There were no telephone calls. Everything, we went to the office. It was just like a normal day. But during that day, a lot went on.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is that organizations need this visibility to establish credibility, because the way that the programs were crafted, and they were crafted because no two were alike.
As we're coming, I'd love to let you go on forever, but as we're coming to the end, what do you think your father's influence was on media communication, not just radio, but all media communication? He was a real pioneer.
Well, I think that people saw that you could raise ratings and you could raise popularity based on doing things for other people.
Right.
Okay.
So he really paved the way for all of us.
And the thing is that radio was in a unique position at that time. Television was a little bit more money-oriented, money-driven, so it's difficult.
So
But
Forrest
he
Willis
raised the visibility.
He was a Renaissance man, raised the visibility, and really paved the way for all of us to come. And
Right.
some of us are sitting here because of people like Forrest Willis.
Right.
And Keith, I want to thank you. Our time has gone by so quickly, and I know you're writing a book, so good luck with that. And he has thousands of pictures, believe. So, yeah, I'm sure you can get a hold of Keith. Briefly, you have an email site. Keith, what is your email?
Walden Center, WALDEN, Center, CTR, @yahoo.com.
And I know Keith would love to hear from you, especially if you knew his father or had some memories of that.
Right.
He's writing that book. And I want to thank you, Keith. The time has
Thank
gone by
you.
very quickly. And thank you for watching this edition of Delain's Digest.